Hello and welcome along to another episode of Living Confidently with Sight Loss. I'm Mike and as always it's lovely to have your company. Now this episode is going to be a little bit different because we're taking the opportunity to look back at some of the fantastic conversations that we've had since the podcast began. When we first came up with the idea of living confidently with sight loss, the aim was really simple. We wanted to create something that people could listen to whenever they fancied, whether they were making a brew, out for a walk with a dog, or maybe even just relaxing at home. I wanted to create real conversations with real people. No complicated jargon, no lectures, just honest chats about living with sight loss, sharing experiences, and hopefully reminding people that whatever stage that they're at, they're not facing it on their own. Now, looking back, I think that we've achieved exactly that. We've been lucky enough to speak to some brilliant guests over the last few months, people who've shared their experiences, their knowledge, and, in some cases, some really moving personal stories. One thing that struck me throughout every interview is just how positive people are. Now, that doesn't mean that life is always easy. Nobody has ever pretended that losing your sight isn't difficult. Of course it can be. But every guest has shown that although sight loss can be life-changing, it certainly doesn't stop life. And that, I think, is one of the biggest messages that we've tried to get across. One of the first things that we talked about was independence. It's a funny word, really, because often we think independence means doing absolutely everything yourself. And actually, it doesn't. Sometimes independence means knowing when to ask for help. Sometimes it's using a piece of technology. And sometimes it's learning a different way of doing something that you've done all your life. That's not giving in. That's adapting. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with adapting. In fact, I'd say it's one of the strongest things any of us can do. We've also spoken a lot about confidence. Now, confidence isn't something that you wake up with one morning. It grows. Sometimes it can grow very slowly. Now, you might go to your first social group feeling really nervous. You might try your first bit of assistive technology, wondering if you'll ever get the hang of it. You might pick up your long cane for the first time and think, this isn't for me. But then, little by little, things become easier. And before you know it, you're doing things that once seemed impossible. Every single guest has spoken about taking that first step, because it's usually the hardest one. I think one of my favourite interviews was with Joe and Bailey. Now, they've both got a real passion for helping people discover what's possible. Whether it's magnifiers, specialist lighting, accessible phones, screen readers or other bits of technology, they've both showed us that there are so many tools available that many people simply don't know exist. Technology has come on so much over the years. Some of the gadgets available now are absolutely incredible. But they also reminded us that technology doesn't have to be expensive or complicated. Sometimes the smallest changes can make the biggest difference. And we also spent time talking with Joe about vision rehabilitation. Now, I'll be honest, before I started working here at Envision, I wasn't entirely sure what that involved. But I learned that it's about rebuilding confidence. It's about helping people cook safely again, helping people organise their homes and managing everyday tasks, getting out and about and doing the shopping, or the simple things just like making a cup of tea. Things that many of us take for granted until they suddenly become difficult. What really stood out for me was that rehabilitation isn't about telling someone what they can't do. It's about showing them what they can still do. Of course, we couldn't talk about confidence without mentioning our friends from Green Doctors. Rachel and Luke have joined us to talk about keeping warm, reducing energy bills, and making homes more energy efficient. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone can help me save a few pounds on my heating bill, I'm all ears. Their advice was practical, straightforward, and incredibly useful. But more importantly, it reminded us that support is available. And sometimes people don't realise just how many organisations are there to help. Then came one of our most heartwarming conversations. Marion and Joe joined us to talk about the befriending service. Now, honestly, this episode really summed up what Envision is all about. People helping people. I know it sounds simple. That's because it is. Sometimes all somebody needs is another person to chat with. A cup of tea, a walk, a visit to the cafe, someone to share a laugh with. Marion spoke so warmly about the friendships that she built through volunteering. And I don't think it surprised anyone when she admitted that she probably gets just as much out of it as the people that she supports. And that's the wonderful thing about volunteering. Everybody benefits. The one thing I've learnt through all this is that nobody should ever feel embarrassed about asking for support. Whether that's through rehabilitation, low vision services, a social group, the befriending service, or simply just picking up the phone and having a chat. There's a whole community out there. And sometimes all you need is someone to point you in the right direction. One thing I really enjoy about recording these podcasts is that there's no two interviews have ever been the same. Every guest has brought their own personality. Some have made me laugh. Some have genuinely made me stop and think. Because these are real stories, real people, real lives. And that's exactly what makes them so powerful. Of course, we've had plenty of fun too. The quickfire questions have become a bit of a favourite. The debate about the tea and coffee and when you put the milk in. One word to describe volunteering. Some of these answers have been brilliant and they've sparked conversations. And it's always nice to end with a smile. Because life doesn't have to be serious all the time. I think if I had to sum up everything that we've talked about over the series recently, I'd probably narrow it down to 5 simple things. Keep talking, keep learning, keep asking questions, keep trying new things, and I think most importantly, keep believing in yourself. Because being sight impaired, living with sight loss might mean doing things differently, but it doesn't stop you living a full, independent and enjoyable life. And I'd like to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you to every single guest who's given up the time to join me. Thank you to everyone behind the scenes at Envision who's helped make these podcasts possible. And a huge thank you to you, our listeners. Whether you've listened to every episode from day one, or you've just discovered the podcast this week, I'm really grateful for the time that you've spent with us. I've received some lovely feedback over the last few months, and it's always fantastic to hear that an interview has helped someone feel a little less alone and encouraged them to try something new or simply brighten their day. That's exactly why we started this podcast. And all this leads me to say that I do have a little announcement. I'm going to be taking a short break from the Living Confidently with Sight Loss podcast. But don't panic, we'll be coming back. And I can promise you that I've already got plenty of ideas for the new series with more inspiring guests, more practical tips, and more stories from people living confidently with sight loss. We'll be chatting to professionals, volunteers, clients, and hopefully a few surprise guests along the way. In the meantime, if you've missed any episodes, why not go back and give them a listen? They're all available on Spotify and on YouTube. Just search for the @Envision Sight Loss Charity channel. Whether it's learning about assistive technology, hearing how befriending changes lives, discovering rehabilitation services, or picking up money-saving advice from the Green Doctors, there's something for everyone. Well, that's just about it from me. Thank you once again for listening and supporting the podcast and being part of our wonderful Envision community. I'm Mike, and remember, with the right support, the right people around you, and a little bit of confidence, there's still so much to look forward to. Take care, enjoy the summer, and we'll be back before you know it with more interviews, more tips, and more stories for you to enjoy. So until next time, bye for now.